Hello and welcome to the first lecture of our building life cycle management. I just need to say that just down here, as you'll see quite often, Kingy, up. So hello, this is Kingston. He's one of my dogs. The other one's Dexter outside, but you would see those later on. They're normally here for most of the tutorials as well. I'm recording new lectures for 2020, but they don't replace the old lectures that you'll find links to in the team. Basically, the old lectures give you some really good information, and I'm just filling in some gaps and maybe pointing in a slightly different way. So you need to watch both. Okay, so please watch the old one, normally 20 minutes long, and watch my new one, probably about the same, I'm going to guess. Asset life cycle management, there's various names for these things. They're undertaken by asset managers, building managers, property managers, facilities managers. If you go looking online, you'll get confused because it seems to be mostly tied in with software provisions and programs and automation, which all help with the whole story. Let's have a little look at the introduction. So we're going to start with the introduction there. I can't find it. There's the introduction. Then we're going to have a look at it. That's whole of life cycle, cradle to grave. And we're going to look at why we need to measure things. All an introduction today, and we'll have a quick look at what maintenance actually is. And then I'll just tell you where to put your questions, okay? This thing here in the middle is basically the circle of life as an asset is. An asset can be a building, can be a bridge, can be a water tower. An asset could be a piece of mechanical equipment. It could be an air conditioning unit. It could be a sugar refinery. Anything you want, if it's man-made, it's an asset. You can also apply this to natural things, but we're not going there. So you normally end up with someone works out they've got a requirement for something. So then they sort of start planning that asset, and this is where they go ahead and they're going to, do facilities studies on them, work out where to build it, how to build it, what it's going to cost, all budgetary stuff. Then they get into here. Unfortunately, you can't see that, but that's actually where you're actually going to create it. You're going to build it. You're going to tender it, build it, occupy it. Then you've got to run it. This is where the majority of the expense for an asset sits, not in its creation, not in its disposal, but in running the thing. So you've got to run it. You've got to run the services. You've got to run the aircon, the lifts, the lighting. You've got to run the maintenance, the painting, the redecorating. You've got to do the safety, the compliance with legislation, all of that sort of stuff. And it goes on. It's an enormous list. Then when it's running, you monitor how your asset is working, because you will have to intervene to improve things. You'll have to stop things going wrong. And we talk more about that later on. Then halfway, well, maybe not even halfway, maybe a third of the way through its planned life, it'll get a refurb. And it might get a second refurb before it's no longer economical to maintain that asset. And then we come to disposal. Important to remember, disposal doesn't mean demolition. You might just sell it to someone else. It could mean demolition if you want to reuse the site, of course, but disposal is a very general term. And once you've done that, you then get a new unit and go all the way around again, continuously going around again, continuously going around again, unless there's a virus gets in the way, of course. So let's have a little look at the introduction here. So building asset management. They're the three words involved in it. So what is a building? Because we're going to concentrate on buildings. A building could be everything from a thunderbox, like an outside toilet on its own, sitting in the middle of a field. It's a building. It could be the unit or the house you live in. It could be one of the university buildings. It could be lecture theatres, laboratories, workshops, library, or just offices. So that's a building. It could be a care home for old people like me. It might be a hospital. It might just be an office. It could be an industrial storage unit. It could be a factory. It could be anything. It's a building. It's a man-made structure. You can also, as I say, structure. It can be bridges and roads, and asset management's used on all those, but we're sticking to the building part of it in this unit. So a building's anything man-made that we can, I suppose you can step inside it somehow, really. What's an asset? Well, a building can be called an asset. So a library is an asset to the council that own it. It'll be on their asset list as library. But it's made up of little bits. So it's got a frame, it's got windows, it's got bricks, it's got water, it's got electricity, it's got doors, it's got carpets, it's got lights. You go on and on and on. And they're sub-assets. So you can call each of those an asset as well. We tend to try and call them elements. So it's bricks and things, because we measure by these later on. What's management? Basically, looking after it. Making sure it performs its intended task economically, safely, and without undue interruption. Obviously, the level of performance required is going to be different between different buildings. So if you were to say had an ordinary office building, and your air conditioning failed, and it took a day or two to repair it, well, it's going to annoy a few people, but it's not critical. If the same failure affects the air conditioning on a hospital, and it's the air conditioning unit that serves the operating theatre, it's a totally different kettle of fish, mate, because you cannot have any breakdown in something like that. It's just so critical. It will cause death. So you're looking at these things. So the quality of the decoration and carpets that you might need in an ordinary manager's office or something is probably different to if it's the office of a Supreme Court judge or a politician. We all don't like politicians, but okay. And the quality, if you think of the quality of the corridors and things in, say, a theatre, we call it back a stage. Even if it's not a theatre, we call that. It's the rear, back. That can be a bit daggy, but front of stage, where the public see it, and it's where you're doing your impressing people and marketing and everything, that's going to be a much higher standard. So you've got to always adjust to be on your feet. The value of building asset management is trying to control and minimise the costs and to prevent unnecessary interruption to the service provision, the operation of the asset, the building, and to maintain compliance with legislation, codes of practice and all that sort of stuff. So where's my next one? I always press the wrong button on this, I'm terribly sorry. So we go cradle to grave. And I say cradle to grave because asset management, or you can say facilities management, and I tend to use it as whole of life profiling as well as another one. It's from the moment you decide you want to or need to build something, as soon as you make that decision, it starts, and it's the process of the feasibility study, it's involved there, the detailed design, it should be involved there, tendering should be involved in there, obviously through the construction, and then it really comes into its own during the use and operation and the refurbishment side of it, and the eventual disposal. So we're involved in all that. We really should be really involved at the feasibility and the detailed design, although it's difficult to get in there really. So if we start off with, like, we look at the whole of life, we consider the costs of creating the asset, operating it and running it safely to meet the requirements of the client and the users throughout its entire life until we get rid of it. We sell it, knock it down, whatever that may be. You cannot separate this from the aims and the needs of the actual owner, the organisation, the developer. They have certain drivers that they have to meet. The developer is profit, and they always want their buildings tenanted, so you've got to keep the tenants happy. A hospital's different, again, as you can imagine, so is a school. But the actual business drivers and the core functions of that business or that occupant of the building are the most important thing. And any asset management plan and profile and what we do has to support that business need. Okay, we're supportive of the core function of whatever it is, looking after people, handing out books. So an office building is obviously different from a hospital, is obviously different from a shopping centre, and the owner's goals and requirements are different from all of those. Assets only exist to support a core function. Hospitals to look after people. libraries to give books out, schools to teach people, and it goes on. So we've got production, healthcare, storage. So building asset management plans, as I said about before, have to align with the client's business aims and outcomes. And the old lecture says the same thing for you. So a nice little graph there, just showing you graphically the costs. So there's a big cost in the design, purchase and construction. But look, although the operational cost is nowhere near as high, it goes on a hell of a lot longer. So that's the operation. That could be your services, your electricity, your water, your air conditioning. It could be your HR. It could be all of those things in there. Then you've got your maintenance, which is, as we look at what maintenance is in a minute, another long-term expense, adds up a lot. Development bobs up and down here. I mean, that could be a that's developing the new one. There could be a little refurbishment here. This could be the defects liability coming out the end. And then you've got the disposal there. So it's all pretty straightforward. Just to show you roughly where the costs are, I apologise it's not the best graphic, but as you can see, the client gets out what his needs are. They work out on their space utilisation, how much space they want, how many floors, blah blah blah. They design and construct it, and then they commission it so people can move in. That's 10 to 20% of the whole life cost. This is the cost over the life of the building. Then we have to run it, and we have to maintain it and repair it. You've got some planned maintenance going on here. You know it's coming, so you service a lift, you service air conditioning, you service fire alarms, you service fire extinguishers. You have to do those, okay? And then there's repairs, things that break, go wrong. Okay, so all of that part accounts for 60 to 80% of the cost of the asset over its life. And then when you get around to capital asset management, this is where you decide, are you going to refit the office? Are you going to renovate the building? You've got to put improvements in, and sometimes the improvements are not your choice. Legislation may change and you have to upgrade something. And you come up and you replace things and you reinvest in it, but eventually you're going to end up having to dispose of it, although it's not said there. But obviously what I wanted to show is the biggest part of it, the costs are in the operation and maintenance really. And that is where we're sitting with this unit, in that area generally. The solution to a problem that doesn't exist, because I forgot all about that slide and I should have got rid of it. How many of those am I going to get? Measurement. If you need to manage anything, you've got to be able to measure it. Otherwise, how do you know if it's getting better, worse, whatever? Now, obviously, with most of our buildings, we've got physical measurements we can use. So we've got floor areas. How many of things we've got? How many lifts have we got? How much energy is being used? We can measure all of that. Certain amounts of maintenance and that we can measure. We get some historical data over a few years. We can measure that. How many people are in the building per square metre of floor or whatever. We can measure it. So there's lots of things we can measure. But when it comes to things like how sustainable is the building, how efficient is the building, how satisfied are the occupants of the building, do the occupants have a high level of output, what's the level of the cleaning? Is the cleaning satisfactory for that type of building? Obviously the level of cleaning in operating theatres fundamentally different from the level of cleaning in a public toilet. I'm trying to make the point with a stupid example. So we need to work out a way to try and measure some of these things that aren't physically there. So we develop things called key performance indicators, and they allow us, we set up, well really, we come up with some artificial measurements for it. We'll talk about them in more detail later. And once we've got those performance figures and the ones we can measure, we can then benchmark against a similar asset. So you could take one office and compare it to another office, and you can see if you're performing better or worse, or is that second office more economical, more comfortable, more productive? Is the client going to go, the occupant's going to go to that one instead of your one, which needs a bit of work doing to it? And one of the things to find out how to measure, got to measure how much maintenance is required, is we end up with what's the asset condition? Where did my thing go? Oh, I remember what I was going to say for the asset condition. We need to know how much maintenance is required now, but I don't want to touch on that now because there's a whole independent lecture on that, on the condition assessment, etc. And I have put up in the files for that particular, I think it might be week 5, I'm not sure. You will find a PDF copy of a draft condition assessment report for a community hall, which you can look at. Okay, so that goes through the maintenance. Maintenance itself, what is maintenance? Basically, maintenance is everything you have to do to maintain an asset or piece of equipment or part of an asset in or returning it to a condition that supports the current required level of service. Now, you've got to be careful with that because the level of service may change over the life of the building. So, as I say there, may have changed since inception. So you might build something as a, well, let's think of an example. You might build something as a small regional hospital, a cottage hospital, and that's got very high service levels required to it. But eventually, that, you know, as the housing estates expand out, etc., they might build a bigger hospital, and they're stuck with this little building. Now, if they don't knock it down and put a housing estate on it, they might convert it to an aged care home, or they might convert it to a school, or they might convert it to start-up office space. They've got different requirements, so you've got to be careful what the requirements are at the time. Things like cleaning and replacement or major refurbishments, they're not maintenance. Okay, OPEX is a term for operational expenditure. There's one called CAPEX, which is capital expenditure. There's 3 different types of maintenance you need to consider. The first one's preventative, which is one we know we have to do it, we know when it's going to be done. That's planned, you know it. It's servicing things, like you're servicing your aircon, you're servicing your water supplies, your electricity, everything like that. You're servicing the whole thing, you know it has to be done. Things like fire systems and that legally have to be done. So they're preventative. Corrective, they're not planned, they just happen, something goes wrong. I think my wife's got back, the dog's getting upset. Something just fails, and it does happen, and we have to pop in and repair it. Backlog, that's basically where corrective works have been postponed, or preventatives have been forgotten, or they've been overlooked, and the maintenance that really needs to be undertaken hasn't taken place, and that asset or building has deteriorated further than it should have, and it may have reached an unsafe condition, it may be underperforming, it may not be reaching the minimum performance standards for whatever its use is. This is very commonly a result of insufficient funding. So clients like to sort of like push backlog to the side a little bit if they can. If we go there, we've got a maintenance strategy, so there's your preventative maintenance, and you've got periodic, predictive and planned, tells you a few examples of them there, and then there's the corrective. So we can run things to failure, deliberately make them fail and then replace them, or you get things that just fail and you just don't know. There's a lot more I can say about that. Maybe we'll talk more about that in the tutorials if you're interested in that sort of thing. Oh, back there we go again. How do we prioritise the maintenance? Well, the most important ones, the P ones, is it legally required? If it's legally required, Building Code of Australia, Work Health Safety, Environmental Protection Acts, disability access, all that sort of stuff, you've got to do them. So they take money off the top straight away of your budget. And the second one is safety of users and visitors, which may not be legislative, but it's still very, very important. So that's important. And then you get the ones where there's a financial consideration and you're planning ahead and you might be running out a little bit of money, so they're not as important. So they tend to drop off the end all the time. In reality, we actually use a risk matrix of the likelihood that something's going to happen, and if it happens, what's the outcome? I mean, so if it's not very likely to happen, but the outcome's going to be 15,000 people die, it's probably important. So if we have a look around, so the risk likelihood, I took this out, this is out of the document I've given you. The risk likelihood, so you've got inevitable, probable, even 50-50, possible or rare. And it's the impact on the asset's ability, whether it's legal. Financial impact could stop you trading. That'd be important for you, wouldn't it? The risk rating we use, what's the risk? Is it a really high risk? Is it going to kill people and stuff? Or goes down to there's no risk anyway. If that outside light fails, it's not going to do anything. So we have those. And then we use those to read off on one of these risk assessment matrices. These are very common standard. So if you've got one here, you say if it's rare to happen and it's insignificant, it's 4 and you probably don't do anything. But if it's rare to happen but it's catastrophic, like a nuclear reactor melting down, well, you might have to think about it. Okay? The red ones are obviously the worst. We use this traffic light system where I used to work. Condition ratings, when we go around and we look at assets and buildings, it's excellent. That's basically as it's brand new. No one's actually managed to use it, wear it, dent it, mark it, anything. Brand new. You don't get that often unless it's just been replaced. You come across something just been replaced. Then you've got good, fair, poor and very poor. Most clients will want their assets to be somewhere around a 3 or a 2, which means you normally find them around a 4 and a 3. Surprisingly, how often you find a 5 and they don't even know about it. Now, questions, all your questions, any comments you've got, any observations you've got, if you want to correct me on anything, I'm open to that because I'm not perfect. You've got to post them through the unit team, preferably for the week or the topic, not the general one, but go through the weekly ones so they don't get mixed up too much. Do not use the general chatting team that people have been using because I've got no idea what unit you're talking about. That's the end of this introductory lecture. I hope it helps out a little bit. Please watch the old lecture because that touches on stuff that I'm not going to touch on here. I'm using them together. Alright, this is Monday evening, it's just gone 5:30. This may or may not be up before we have our tutorial at 7, so I'll see you all then. Ta-da!